Welcome to our podcast series on diversity and inclusion, brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading independent professional body dedicated to promoting best practice and raising the standards of coaching worldwide. I'm Dr. Alexandra Morgan, Senior Lecturer and Coach Educator. In this series, we're privileged to be talking to a superb range of coaches and consultants whose work is making a significant contribution to advancing diversity and inclusion in society and in the coaching profession. We hope this series sparks curiosity and encourages change. So, welcome back everybody to the next in our series of diversity and inclusion podcasts. And with me today, I have Jenny Plaister 10. Welcome, Jenny.
Good morning, Alex.
Good morning. Yeah, nice to see you. Nice to be with you. So, Jenny, I always love chatting to you because, we have a research interest in common, which is basically, the lived experience of working in and with multilingual and multicultural teams. And your specific area is on the intercultural side, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes. It's often the piece that seems to be missing in this recent movement for EDI. It seems that the impact of culture is still overlooked.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I've noticed that too. I was kind of pleased but also intrigued by the fact that I think it was only just this year that the CIPD have issued a paper about working in multinational and multilingual, multicultural teams, and it as though it was a new thing. But of course, the likes of you and I, we've been doing it for years and years, and we know very much that there is an impact of culture, isn't there, on teamwork and coaching.
And the crossover is often communication. It manifests as a conflict.
Yes, absolutely.
And then it becomes a personal attribution rather than the impact of culture and a communication preference, let's say.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I think that there is a lot put down in international teams. A lot is put down to maybe personality, and the personality profiling tools are hugely popular across multinational teams, and I do think that they have a place, but international communication is far more complex than that, isn't it?
Yes, I agree. They all say, the tools all say that they're international and they have an international population, but actually doesn't necessarily mean that they're applicable for an international audience. It just means they've been rolled out internationally.
Yes, yeah, that's really true, isn't it? Yeah, I've noticed that. These personality profiling companies are now calling themselves global, but the origins of them were set very much in a certain cultural paradigm, weren't they?
Yes.
So, Jenny, tell us a little bit about your research and your careers.
Well, shall I start with the research first then? When I came back to this country after many years of being away, I decided to concentrate on adding value, if you like, to people that were moving around the world, because I had moved around the world for several different companies and never got any support, no coaching or training. And it was actually when I was working in the Asia Pacific region that I started to notice just how much different cultural values impacted the way people not only lived, but worked and in turn led or managed. And so when I did my master's at Brookes, I decided to do my dissertation on the impact of culture in the coaching relationship. And at that time, and even to this day, the impact of culture was not really considered to be of any importance. I actually did the research with coaches that were living all over the world. So it covered all the continents, and it covered several thousand, 100,000 hours of coaching practice. And what transpired from that research is that our culture is subjective, actually, even though there are cultural traits that emerge from each country, each group of people. The meaning that we attach to that is actually an individual thing, and that can change along the lifespan. As well, what the research identified was that there are certain external influences that impact us across our lives, such as the geography in which we were born or the political state of the country in which we were born at the time. If you think about the impact of COVID now to the next generation, that would probably be a lens now if the research were done at this moment in time. So the external lenses kind of drove, if you like, the way people looked at the impact of their own culture, and bearing in mind that culture's hidden from us, and until we leave our own culture and go and live or work overseas, we don't actually notice what it is to be British, for example. It took me 3 times of going and coming back before I really started to realise I'm doing this because I'm English. Mm-hmm. So these external lenses, the model shows external lenses and an internal lens. The internal lens is comprised of the cultural self and personality. The model is very much based on values and beliefs. So what are the values and beliefs that drive you? What has been the external influences in your life that in turn have formed your values and your beliefs and have formed your cultural self, which can change along the course of the lifespan?
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because, again, like you, when I first started to work internationally, I didn't really realise how much of my Britishness, if you like, was affecting the way I am. But once noticed,
yes,
you are able to change, aren't you? Or you're able to flex.
Yes, and once noticed, you can't unnotice it, which is interesting as well, because once you notice it everywhere. So it shows up everywhere, literally everywhere. But like a lot of people, I was blind to the impact of culture for many, many years. Even having worked in the US, and then I went to work in the Asia Pacific region, which was 12 different countries. And it was only there when I had to lead teams across 12 different countries and 12 different cultures. And everybody showed up with their different ways of being and working, that I really started to think, this is more than just personality here. This is definitely entrenched values and beliefs that are out of awareness.
Yeah. As you say, they're sort of entrenched beliefs. And I know that your model focuses on values, doesn't it?
It does. It looks at what are the most important things that have influenced you in your life. I won't say in the past, in your life. So, for example, I'm coaching a gentleman from India. And when I showed him the model, I always asked the question, which lens, if sometimes I use the word resonates and other times I'll use a more simple word, like which lens do you relate to most? And he pointed immediately to the economics lens, no question, straight away, right in there. And I said, okay, so is there another lens that jumps out? And he said, yes, families and community. And I said, so tell me a bit more, first of all, about economics. Well, I've been driven to really provide extraordinarily well, both for my family here in the UK and my family back in India. And this drive is relentless. I can't stop. I just want to earn more and more and more and more money. And then I went back to families and community. I mean, he explained a bit about why he was doing it. He was doing it to support his family of origin, but also to prove to everybody that he'd made it, and he'd made it in the Western world, having come from very, very poor beginnings. So the coaching then, after exploring the external lenses, then goes into the middle and looks at the values that he holds and questions whether those are still applicable, because he was also getting burnout, he was exhausted, he wasn't spending the time with his family that he actually wanted to. And it started off a conversation about the way he works, the way he does not really look after himself in the workplace because he comes from a hierarchical society. He's always looking up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So he's very good at influencing upwards, but not so good at working with his peers or even his team.
Interesting. I know that your model is called the kaleidoscope model, isn't it? Can you tell us a little bit about why it's called that?
It was when I was doing the research, and when you're researching, Alex, you get a whole load of data and you can't make sense.
Oh God, I remember that. Yeah, and you feel so lost, don't you? It's like I've literally no idea what I'm going to do with all of this. Yeah.
And bearing in mind, I was interviewing coaches from all over the world, really. So every time I interviewed one of them, I could just see this image of this kaleidoscope kept coming into my mind. And it was I'm very colour driven. So it was very colourful. And then the imagery of a kaleidoscope came in my mind, and the lenses fell quite naturally, as a part of a kaleidoscope. So this lens approach comes from that. But also, more importantly, I think, is the fact that cultures change. They're not static. So the kaleidoscope, in its beautiful form, it will change, it will expand, and it will come back again, and it will come back at a different place. And that's what happens with cultures. They evolve. So it's not a static model. And on my website, there's one that shows, the fact that this model is emergent. And yet the brokerage unit, if you like, between the external and the internal parts of the model is values. So, and that comes from a quote from Hall, who says, values are the brokerage unit between the external and the internal. And when I found that quote in my literature search, it was like, yes. It's all about values. But it does go further into beliefs as well. So it's a bit of both, values and beliefs. Because if you're working with someone who's guided by a higher belief system, if you're working someone from the Middle East or some of the Asian cultures, they're guided by a higher purpose, as Christians are, potentially. So it's important to understand what guides them really, and where their belief systems come from. And I think we shy away from that a lot because we think it's not politically correct. Whereas I have the opposite view. I think it's almost neglectful not to delve into what drives people to do what they do, to be the leaders that they are.
And that echoes my research, actually, which, I found that people actually did want to talk about these things. They're actually encouraged not to, or they feel that they shouldn't, but they really do want to talk about these things in a very open, empathetic, exploratory way, in a non-judgmental way, but they want to be able to talk about it.
Yes, they do. And there were a couple of people that really influenced me as well from the literature. One was Triandis, who talks about subjective culture. So culture being all about, what does it mean for you? What does it mean for you, Alex, to be British will be different to what does it mean to me to be British, potentially. But there will be similarities, and that's what Hofstede has always said, tendencies of groups of people, not absolutes. And I think over the years, really, Hofstede's work's been misunderstood, because people have assumed he's talking a static dimension. And he's not. He's talking, like he says, tendencies. Yeah. And the other people that influenced me a lot were Sue and Sue from the counselling world. And they've written this absolutely fantastic book called Counselling the Culturally Diverse. And they actually said, and this still resonates with me to this day, they said that treating people the same is actually discriminatory. That people do not want to be treated the same. They don't want to be, all people from Asia want to be treated like that, and all people from, of another group want to be treated like that. That is absolutely not true. And everybody wants to have the opportunity to really unpick their own personal world, which is what coaching's all about, right?
Yeah, totally. I love that phrase, unpick your own personal world. I think that it is, you're right, it is what coaching's all about. And I think it is so important, for coaches and clients to understand that their personal world is influenced by a number of things, be it where you were born, where you were brought up, as you said, values and belief systems, the language that you speak, whatever it is, there are influences, for all like a kind of paint palette, as it were,
Yes.
we'd all be different nuances, different mixes of all of that, wouldn't we?
Absolutely would. The problem in corporate life is that there's not enough time to really sit down and understand another person uniquely, which is what everybody would love, of course, and there's just not enough time. And I guess the watch out for coaches is that, we think we've been working globally, and we think we've been working with huge corporates that span the globe, and therefore we think we know. But we really don't, because the impact of culture is hidden. So therefore, it's incumbent on us as coaches to work on our own stuff again, raise our own awareness about the impact of our own culture before we assume that we're working effectively with someone else in this arena.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I remember years ago I did an intercultural profiling tool. Sorry, Jenny, I didn't know about your model at the time. But I did find it, whilst I agree with you, you must take these things as, not static, as not labelling you forever, as it were. But I did actually find it quite useful, because I remember comparing my own personal profile to the British tendencies, shall we say, this kind of average profile on this particular tool for a British person, and actually found that I was really quite different on a lot of the dimensions. Yeah, so turned out not to be typically British at all.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and then that made me think about, the international folk that I was working with at the time, how I wondered then about how I showed up to them, because I strongly suspected they were expecting somebody typically British, if you like, typically female and British. And actually, often I was showing up in quite a different way. And I think it made me think, well, I wonder if that's a little bit jarring or a little bit unexpected. And so it did make me adjust my approach, not to be kind of more British in inverted commas, but just to be a little bit more careful, I suppose, and a bit more understanding, about what might be the potential difference between what they were expecting and who I actually am. And then I found with that caution that I was actually even more effective, actually.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is about cultural relativism, actually. So what I've found is that in the UK, I'm definitely countercultural. I don't show up as a typical anything, really. And I'm quite proud of that, actually. But when my husband's from a Dutch colony, so we go back and forth to the Netherlands a lot, where we've got family and home there. And compared to the Dutch, who are the most direct in communication, as you know, Alex, in the world, I am extraordinarily English and have indirect communication when compared with the Dutch.
Yeah.
So culture is relative. We only have to compare the north and the south of the UK to see that, right? We have huge differences just in our tiny island, let alone when you compare all the way around the world. So, who you are in your home country and who you are when you work with different people should actually be different. It's incumbent on us to shift who we are, really, in order to be effective interculturally.
I mean, going back to your Indian client, I was wondering, in a lot of ways, what you were saying there was kind of typical of a lot of coaching clients, in the sense that they have this, but the current behavior is somewhat counterproductive. to the values. It's sometimes in coaching that can be a little bit difficult to point out unless you've been coaching a long time and you get used to giving your clients fairly frank feedback, but it can be difficult to point out. So I was intrigued with what you were saying about your Kaleidoscope tool and actually just presenting that to the client. And it sounded like he kind of worked that out for himself.
Well, he did work it out when he walked himself through the model, because he realised he was working with an old paradigm. So when we drilled it down, we realised that his leadership approach was inappropriate for this, where he's working now. Because he was working with a very hierarchical model, because that's where he came from. And it's so entrenched, this belief that, the world is hierarchical. And actually, a lot of the world's moved on from that, it's flatter, theoretically. So, I mean, again, relative to India, where he came from, the company that he was working in over here was flatter, again, relative. So he did some. The coaching then went into the development of his leadership style in order to be more adaptive. So again, you needed to work much differently with his team and his peers, and be less subservient, really, to his boss. It wasn't what they wanted. They wanted, and this has shown up a lot in my coaching with others as well, who present for coaching because they're not actually taking responsibility and showing up in a way that is expected over here as a leader. In fact, I worked with a Chinese gentleman who, because of the notion of face, which is a value system, he actually didn't say anything at board meetings. He was the CTO. And the expectation was that he would contribute as the CTO, but he just sat there and didn't say anything. So again, working with the model, I asked him which lens resonated, and he said education. It would tell me why. At school, we're taught to just repeat what the teacher says. We're not taught to question. And we're taught not to say anything in case it's wrong, because we don't want to cause ourselves a loss of face. And actually, in the Chinese culture, it's wisdom to say nothing in case it's wrong, in case we cause loss of face to the other or ourselves. So, the coaching then went on to more, I suppose it could be a little bit more training oriented to explain how things work here, and how there was an expectation that he would actually contribute at board meetings. But I have to say, that took quite some time, because it was an entrenched education lens.
Yeah, sure. I was wondering there whether you also do some work with the other side, as it were, to help the whole team, taking, that as an example, to actually help the whole team understand what's going on?
Well, they were a small team, but I did work with 2 or 3 people from that team. And actually, that is the missing link often. You do really need to get in there and work with the whole team to make the biggest difference. But if you just get one person, it's not enough. They get an insight, they get an aha moment, and they might change slightly. But, the other side need to understand as well that this is a values-driven approach to life, not just work. And they didn't understand that.
So, Jenny, you've mentioned a couple of the lenses on the Kaleidoscope model. Could you tell us about the other ones?
Yes, now you're challenging me to remember them, aren't you? There's diversity. So actually it can be used for all aspects of diversity. So women leaders have used it, for example. So it has more applications rather than just culture. Cultural norms is a separate lens. There's education, there's political, there's science, and there's geography and communities families.
Yeah.
One lens, communities and families. And there's legal's with political, I think.
Yeah.
And then there's the arts as well, and that's with something else.
Okay.
Science and the arts, I think.
So I'm just intrigued as, I know that when you're coaching people, you, by the sounds of it, you show them the model, and as you say, you ask them which one resonates the most. If they were to say geography, for example, what kind of discussion does that then develop into?
That's mine, actually. I always use that one because that does resonate with me. Because I'm actually from a small town in the southwest of England, Weston-super-Mare, if you know it.
Yeah.
And I grew up, for some reason, totally counterculturally, believing that I had to get out and there was a big wide world out there, and Weston-super-Mare wasn't it, which was very opposite to my family and to a lot of the people that live here, because I'm here now. And my other lens was communities and families. So there was a huge draw from this geography because that's where my family of origin still are. And yet, because I had this belief that I wanted to go out and explore the world, the world had so much to be explored. I did that, and I left and went first to Sheffield and then the States and then Asia Pacific and then the Netherlands and all over the place. And so when I would go into the inner lenses, my values now are such that I would call myself a global citizen. And that impacts the way I live. I'm married interculturally. I've raised a son in several different cultures, and I have lots of diverse friends. It certainly impacts the way I lead a team. It really does, because it's all about bringing out the best of individual people and understanding what drives them, even when we're in a team. So this one team notion is great, but we're all a one team made up of individual ones. So I often get, we're one team. What comprises that one team?
Yeah, it's an interesting phrase, isn't it? I wonder what people really mean when they say that. Are they trying to say that we're trying to generate a homogeneous type in the team, or what is it you think they're trying to say?
Well, it's interesting. It usually means we're all driving in the same direction. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they all buy into the same direction, because they haven't actually necessarily been asked. It's set, isn't it, by the leader, and off they go. So really, to lead a multicultural team to the best that you possibly can and to get creativity and innovation is to really sit down with each person and find out what they want to contribute, how they want to contribute it. But that takes time, Alex, and people are time poor. So this is probably the biggest reason why it gets overlooked.
I get the sense that now, with hybrid working or, 100% virtual teams, that it feels like that's more important than ever, actually, now, to really check in with people and wonder what it is that they want and what they want to be good at and what interests them and how they want to show up in the team.
Yeah. And I do get a lot of leaders and emerging leaders now coming to me and saying, everything that I knew or thought I knew in a face-to-face world is now being challenged in this remote world. And how can I show up as a better leader remotely? So it takes on a whole new dimension, really.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we're running out of time. Otherwise, that would be a fascinating conversation to explore. We'll run another podcast series on that. No, absolutely, to your point. But as we are running a bit out of time, Jenny, and I know there'll be people listening to this that will want to know more about your model and how they can get hold of you. Can you tell us where they would find the information and how they would get hold of you?
So my website is www.10consulting.co.uk, and it's /kaleidoscope. So there's a book, there are kits that can be purchased that include a desktop mat for one-to-one coaching and also a floor mat. So this can be used very effectively for team coaching. It's very good for setting purpose. And it also includes things like little models, so that if people have been trained in constellations, as I have, you can use that approach. And the floor mat, obviously, it can be used experientially. So it's great for saying, and what's going on now for you when you stand there? What's happening in your body? Where are you feeling this? So for somatic practice, it's a good tool.
Okay, that sounds great. And are they able to use the tool, frankly, just by buying it from you, or do you provide training in how it should be used?
Yes, I do provide training. I do occasionally open masterclasses. I was due to do one, or I'm due to do one at Coaching at Work, for Coaching at Work. I've done one already for them. But I also do bespoke training.
Wonderful. Well, Jenny, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you,
as I said, there is quite an overlap, isn't there, between your research area and mine? So I always thoroughly enjoyed talking to you.
Me too.
Yeah, as the time that we're recording this, it's just before Christmas. So I wish you a happy Christmas, but it will be released shortly after Christmas, no doubt.
Yeah. And we need to say happy holidays, don't we?
Yes, true.
I made that mistake when I spoke to someone in the US. I said happy Christmas. I thought, I'm supposed to say happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays. Yeah, good. Anyway, thank you, Jenny.
Thanks, Alex. Bye.
Bye. So thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. I've been Alex Morgan. Our purpose is to inspire and champion coaching excellence, to advance the coaching profession and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and in turn society. If you'd like to find out more, please follow us on LinkedIn and explore our webpage at theassociationforcoaching.com. There you can keep up to date with our latest episodes and conversations, as well as our digital learning calendar.